State of the Union, President Donald Trump addressed lawmakers and the nation. Why some of his remarks pleased pro-lifers. Preparing to vote. Senators are ready to decide the president's fate in his impeachment trial. We're on Capitol Hill. Being poor in spirit. Pope Francis tells the faithful the best way to find true freedom. And an apology. The Holy Father greets the woman whose arm he struck on New Year's Eve. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, February 5th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Trump pushed for school choice, religious freedom, and an end to late-term abortions at his State of the Union speech. His remarks drew praise from Republican lawmakers, but enraged some Democrats. In fact, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tore up her copy of the speech. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, President Trump took to Twitter to criticize the House Speaker. He says it was actually, quote, a triumphant evening for our country.
In his State of the Union address, President Trump pledged to defend religious freedom in the U.S.
In America, we don't punish prayer. We don't tear down crosses. We don't ban symbols of faith.
The president says public schools should allow prayer, and Congress should allow parents to help send their kids to the right school.
Pass the Education Freedom Scholarships and Opportunities Act, because no parent should be forced to send their child to a failing government school.
Democrats remained seated for most of the president's remarks, while Republicans gave lively applause, like when the president defended life in the womb.
I'm also calling upon members of Congress here tonight to pass legislation finally banning the late-term abortion of babies.
And that moment gave this mother reason to cheer. Her 2-year-old daughter, Ellie, born premature, was one of the president's special guests.
Born at just 21 weeks and 6 days and weighing less than a pound, Ellie Schneider was a born fighter.
President Trump also touted the success of the U.S. economy, calling it a blue-collar boom. But in the Democrats' rebuttal to his speech, Michigan's governor pushed back.
So when the president says the economy is strong, my question is, strong for whom? Strong for the wealthy?
And Democrats rejected the president's health care pledge.
You know, he said he's protecting people with pre-existing conditions when at the same time he's pursuing a lawsuit that would destroy protections for people with pre-existing conditions.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi showed her disdain for the president's words, ripping up her copy of the speech. We heard from lawmakers pleased with the pro-life and faith-based language.
I really liked how he talked about pro-life issues and standing up for the unborn and wanting to eliminate late-term abortions.
This president is someone who doesn't just talk about pro-life and the value of life, but he backs it up with policies.
Here is a president who is actually talking about God in the State of the Union address. That's pretty special.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she ripped up the president's speech because it was, quote, a manifesto of mistruths. Now, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops applaud the president's school choice proposals. They say it could give a boost to Catholic schools across the country. Tracy.
All right. Thank you, Mark. White House correspondent Mark Irons. Again, thank you, Mark. Coming up later in the show, we speak with Ellie Schneider, Ellie's mother. The Senate has brought the impeachment trial of President Trump to a close, voting to acquit the president by a vote of 52 to 48 on Article 1, abuse of power, and by a vote of 53 to 47 on Article 2, obstruction of Congress. Catholic News Agency's Matt Hadra reports now from Capitol Hill. Matt?
Good evening, Tracy. Democrat Doug Jones of Alabama was among the senators voting to convict President Trump. His announcement was a big deal to Democrats who were looking to present a united front in voting to remove the president from office.
I did not run for the Senate hoping to participate in the impeachment trial of a duly elected president, but I cannot and will not shrink from my duty to defend the Constitution and to do impartial justice.
Alabama Democrat Doug Jones signaled he was sticking with his party, just like Republican Susan Collins once considered another possible swing vote.
I do not believe that the House has met its burden of showing that the president's conduct, however flawed, warrants the extreme step of immediate removal from office.
But Republican Mitt Romney said his oath before God demands he break ranks and vote to convict on one charge the president faces: abuse of power.
I acknowledge that my verdict will not remove the president from office. The results of this Senate court will in fact be appealed to a higher court, the judgment of the American people.
Democrat Chris Coons of Delaware criticizes Republicans. He predicts President Trump will, quote, invite foreign intervention in the next election.
If my colleagues who say what President Trump did was inappropriate, was wrong, was harmful to our elections and our country, but they are unwilling to vote for his removal, show us what else they're willing to do to actually protect our elections.
Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland warns the House will not back down in its investigation of the president.
With respect to how we go forward, again, I hope we can focus on issues that are, important to people of the country, even as the House continues to do its job to hold the president accountable.
And this morning, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler said it's likely the House will issue a subpoena to former National Security Advisor John Bolton. While House Democrats may not be ready to wrap things up just yet, with this vote, the Senate closes the book on impeachment and can move on to normal business. Tracy?
Catholic News Agency's Matt Hadra reporting for us tonight from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Matt. In Iowa, Democratic Party officials have released the results of 71% of precincts, but it is still not enough to declare a winner in Monday night's landmark presidential contest. Iowa Democratic Party Chair Troy Price apologized Tuesday night. The snag is blamed on a malfunctioning app that was supposed to make it easy for the state's almost 1,700 precincts to report results. The snafu puts Iowa's coveted position as the first in the nation presidential contest at risk. Democratic Party officials say they will not again use the same app or vendor. FBI Director Christopher Wray testified today before the House Judiciary Committee. He asserted the steps taken to get a FISA warrant against former Trump campaign aide Carter Page were unacceptable.
These tools are powerful and intrusive, so it is our responsibility as public servants to honor our duty of candor to the FISA court when seeking to use our authorities and to exercise.
Wray says the FBI is adding safeguards to reform the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act system. This is his first testimony since a December report issued by Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz. It showed that top FBI employees made errors in the steps they took to obtain a FISA warrant to monitor the former Trump campaign aide. The Syrian government continues to pound rebels in the northern part of the country, and now the president of neighboring Turkey is threatening to use force against Syria's army if they do not pull back.
Şubat ayı içerisinde rejimin gözlem noktalarımızın gerisine
Turkey's President Erdogan is demanding that Syrian troops withdraw back to an earlier ceasefire line. The Syrian army, backed by Russian forces, is destroying the last rebel strongholds. The violence has forced more than 500,000 refugees to head towards the border with Turkey in the last 2 months. The United Nations says over 6,000 children are being forced to flee every day. The deadly coronavirus has now killed some 500 people, and there are now almost 25,000 cases in China. The streets of Wuhan, where the outbreak started, are empty. Stadiums there are being turned into makeshift hospitals for the sick. People are being forced to stay in their homes, and more businesses are cutting back. That said, there could be a breakthrough on a vaccine. Sky News in Britain is reporting that British scientists cut the development time from years to just 14 days, and they're ready to start testing on animals as early as next week. The Vatican is answering a report on the status of the head of the papal household. A German Catholic weekly publication says Archbishop Georg Gainswein has taken a leave of absence. Holy See officials are refusing to confirm the report. Instead, they say he remains on his job. The report says Gainswein had been asked by Pope Francis to focus on his role as private secretary to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. The Vatican's International Center for Missionary Animation and EWTN are hosting a communications course for the directors and communication experts of the Pontifical Mission Societies around the world. The week-long course, split into language groups of Spanish, English, and French, aims to prepare the staff of the Pontifical Mission Societies offices across 6 continents to better share their missionary work through the media. This week, 24 Spanish-speaking directors and collaborators from 9 different countries are attending the course. Alejandro Bermudez, director of EWTN's ACI Group, joins us now from Rome. Thank you for being with us, Alejandro.
Great to be with you, Tracy.
Well, as the director of International Catholic News Agency that reports in 5 languages, what was the message that you wanted to give to the Pontifical Mission staff?
Well, as you know, they requested our help as EWTN to train all the Spanish-speaking directors of the Pontifical Mission Societies throughout Latin America. And they are really eager to learn how to use the emerging technologies to do their job, which is basically promoting a missionary conscience among Catholics and promoting also vocations to the missionary life, nuns and priests that will go into missions. So basically, my message was, as part of the EWTN family, was we can do it. Thanks God, we have the resources now, we have the technology, that if we use it wisely with a good sense of serving the Lord, we can be very successful.
So what have you learned from your time this week with the members of the Pontifical Mission Societies?
2 things, basically. Number one is how eager they are to learn how to use the internet, how to use websites, social media, and every resource that is out there to preach the gospel. And number 2 is how they are devoted to do this job, because you can see very competent people, and some of them doing this work on a volunteer basis because they come from very poor countries in Latin America or in Central America. So it has been very edifying to see the enthusiasm and the desire to learn. And Tracy, I can promise you they have been absorbing like sponges. We have lined up a great group of professionals for him in Rome. So they are going to go back very well prepared. I'm very happy with that.
That's great to hear. Alejandro, why is it so crucial for those responsible for church communications to be professional and effective in sharing the work of the church around the world?
It's because this is the nature of the game right now. You see that even the smallest store in a small town has a website, has social media. So we saw what happened in the church when the church did not catch up with the development of the new technologies. That's why Mother Angelica and EWTN as a television station or radio station was so revolutionary, because it was basically the church catching up. So we don't want to lose this new wave of emerging technologies and be right there with providing the gospel, the same eternal Word of God, but with the use of the new technologies. And that is a message, believe me, Tracy, that they have absorbed very well. So again, I am very happy to have the opportunity to provide this service to the church.
Well, Alejandro, thank you for providing your insight and all that you're doing. We appreciate it. Alejandro Bermudez, director of EWTN's ACI Group. Thank you. Coming up, analysis of the president's State of the Union address and how it's playing with voters. Pope Francis says true freedom comes from giving your life to others. At his weekly talk with pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says that the richness of this world goes away, including money. But those who are poor in spirit learn that power comes from humility and loving others. Touting a booming economy, secure borders, and falling crime rates, President Donald Trump presented his case to the nation last night that under his leadership, the country is on the right track. Democrats, however, seem to disagree with that assessment. Joining me now with her analysis is Rachel Del Giudice. She is congressional reporter for the Daily Signal. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's start off with your thoughts of the president's speech last night. What did you think?
I think it was a uniquely patriotic moment. Every State of the Union is special. The guests that are invited, talking about the accomplishments, but looking how President Trump really highlighted the stories of everyday Americans, from the Tuskegee Airman, who was a veteran of 3 wars, to the family that was reunited. So that was really beautiful to see, but also looking at how the American people have benefited a lot in the past 3 years under President Trump. I mean, looking at just unemployment numbers, it's a 50-year unemployment low, which is really cool to see. Lowest it's been for African Americans. They have the lowest unemployment rates ever. And something for me that was interesting to see when I write about these issues, I covered tax reform when it was passed in 2017. And these are not just people that they brought in. Like, these are uniquely American stories. There was a man I covered in Florida. He had a cookie baking business, diabetic-free, sugar-free cookies, and he had an employee there. He gave him a raise, and this employee was able to buy his wife a new car because she had 2 small girls. And so just looking at those stories, I was able to hear the story from Mike himself, and watching last night and covering the speech, I was like, these are not just people that they've chosen. While it's wonderful, these are the stories of Americans across this country.
Yeah, Rachel, the president talked about his achievements, and he really didn't focus at all on the impeachment. Do you think that was an effective strategy?
I think it was effective. I think whenever you look at the American people and tell their stories, I think that is what is most effective, because that's what we identify with. And then when you look at the response of the left, with Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech as soon as it's finished, I was sitting there watching, I'm like, that was a speech that told these beautiful American stories of that Tuskegee Airman, of the family that was reunited, the girl who received a scholarship for her school, so many other beautiful stories. And when the left claims to be the party, of acceptance, of tolerance, of, we want to work together, but then an incident like that happens, I think it shows the exact opposite. And it shows that, middle America, this is, they're the one that they're experiencing the benefits of this, and not what the left tries to do when they try to be divisive instead of working to unite. And I think this speech, Lindsey Graham put it the best. He's like, you can tear up the speech, but you can't tear up the accomplishments. And you couldn't have put it better.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that, about the tension between the two. We saw that even President Trump, when Speaker Pelosi went to shake his hand, he kind of pulled away, and then obviously her ripping up the scripts. It's really, that tension's obvious to a lot of folks.
It is obvious to a lot of folks, and there was banter on Twitter, as it always is, like, oh, did he see her hand? Did he not see her hand? Who knows? I mean, we won't know, but I think it's interesting. There was another clip on Twitter where it looked like, before this came out a couple hours ago, of her like testing to rip the speech, and then at the very end, she obviously ripped it both in 2. And I think when you highlight divisiveness like that, that's not what Americans want to see. They're wanting to see all of these accomplishments, and they're living those accomplishments. And so I think that down the road, as we go into election, Americans will decide ultimately where they want to go. But I think the State of the Union and the great successes that people owned being there are story enough for that.
Yeah, and quickly, we're almost out of time, but some analysts are saying, in essence, this was a re-election pitch, the speech was, for the president. What do you think of that, and do you think that it's playing to his voters?
It very well could be, but I think when you look at what has happened, how he has secured the border, how the economy is booming, I think it's interesting. Just today, a Gallup poll came out that I think it was 59% of Americans are excited about their economic future. And so these are real wins, and I think it's because of policy he's worked to implement since day one that we're reaping now. So I think it goes back to that. We'll see where it goes, but by telling those stories, I think he wasn't just saying, oh, this is my vision for the future. While he did say that, he was like, this is real life for Americans now, with these hugely amazing unemployment numbers, African American unemployment at an all-time high, unemployment for women at an all-time high, for other minorities. So he was just telling those true stories, and that is an effective strategy.
Well, thank you so much for your analysis, Rachel. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel Del Giudice, the congressional reporter for the Daily Signal. Thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you.
Up next, Pope Francis delivers a message to global financial leaders. And shaking hands, the Holy Father met with a woman who grabbed him on New Year's Eve. President Trump's State of the Union address last night featured a number of tributes and touching moments. But as you saw earlier in the show, perhaps one of the most heartwarming moments was when the president recognized Ellie Schneider and her young daughter, Ellie, who was born in just 21 weeks and 6 days. Ellie's mom, Ellie Schneider, joins me now by Skype from Gladstone, Missouri, along with Ellie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us on tonight, Tracy.
Well, Robin, take me back to 2017 when you were pregnant with Ellie. What was going through your mind when you realized that you were going to have to deliver your little daughter just over 21 weeks?
The first time we were told that she was going to be born, she was actually 17 weeks. And there is no hope for viability at that age. So when we reached 21 weeks and 6 days, there still was really no hope. But we were glad that we had gotten that much farther.
I know you've described her size at birth as not much bigger than a soda can. It's really hard to imagine. What were the doctors telling you at that time about her odds of survival?
She had a 0% chance. But the hospital that we were at actually had a really great rate of success with 22-weekers. So that's why the doctor on call decided to go ahead and give Ellie a chance and see how she did. But she told us going in that she would try, but they just did not think she was going to make it at all.
That must have been so hard for you. What were you feeling during that time?
It was the hardest time of my life. I just felt failure in not being able to stay pregnant with her. I felt guilt. Obviously, I was terrified. There was a lot of physical pain. It was a very dark period of my life.
I know you talked about your reliance on faith and prayers through that journey. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, we have a wonderful church here in Kansas City who, from the moment they found out there were complications with Ellie's pregnancy, just started praying for us and really showing up in a strong way for our family. And between that community and our faith that no matter what happens, God had it under control. That's what got us through the whole situation. I just think I would have fallen apart otherwise.
And we saw you last night at the State of the Union, and your joy was, just so apparent when you held Ellie and the president introduced you. Can you talk about that experience?
It was, I flashed back to the day that I first saw her in the incubator and just begging her to hold on and to fight for her life. And the moment that they introduced us and everyone stood up and started clapping, I just looked at her and I just said, "You did it. You made it, Ellie. You are changing the world." It's just, she amazes me.
Absolutely, and it was an amazing experience to watch you guys there. President Trump is asking Congress to provide an additional $50 million to fund neonatal research. How much of an impact do you think that will have for other families across the country who need that type of care like you did?
I think it's vital that this starts becoming seen as an actual medical problem and being talked about and treated as opposed to being swept under the rug. I'm worried that $50 million probably isn't going to be a lot. Her hospital bills were $10 million, so premiums can be very expensive, but I am so grateful for just being recognized as an actual condition and having research funds in that amount put towards it, because any little bit helps.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and being on our show today. We really appreciate it, and thank you, Ellie, as well.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Pope Francis urges global finance leaders to reduce economic inequality.
Todos somos responsables para hacer algo.
In a surprise visit to the New Forms of Solidarity conference at the Vatican, the Holy Father asked participants to take responsibility of the growing gap between the rich and the poor. Currently, the 50 richest people possess the equivalent of over $2 trillion. Pope Francis's main message of hope was to focus on solvable problems rather than lack of resources. And finally tonight, there's an update to the incident between Pope Francis and the woman who grabbed him on New Year's Eve. The Holy Father lost his patience with the woman and struck her arm. Video of the incident went around the world. The Pope apologized the next day, but now there is a new development. Last month, the Holy Father met the woman and shook her hand. The meeting took place after the Pope's weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican. Prior to the greeting, Pope Francis said Christ can bring good out of any circumstance, even an apparent failure. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.